All right, we did this one in class today. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about it, but you all, you said because we want these to be equal, the easiest way to check that is to put them into y equals. So we're going to type like one of them into y1 and then into y2. And the idea is we're looking at the x table to figure out when are they going to be the same. Remember that you can, so we found these were the answers because they were the closest places where the graphs were going to meet. Excuse me, and we found that to change what the y counts by, remember there's a little thing that pops up at the bottom of your table that says to change, it gives you the option to hit the plus sign. And when you hit the plus sign, you can change what it's counting by. In this instance, because of the numbers that I was given, I knew I was going to need them to count by 0.1 so that I could get one decimal place. So I found 0 in my x column, and then I hit the plus sign, and I changed it to count by 0.1. And when you hit enter, it should then count by like 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and then obviously negatives on the other side. I think you all are okay on that one, so I'm not going to really talk anymore about it. All right, 14, we said this one, you will have graph paper tomorrow, and this one will be easier to do with graph paper. So they've given us the directrix. Remember, this is very similar to an asymptote. So I'm going to graph y equals 3, kind of like I would an asymptote. And then I've got the focus. So we want the vertex. The focus is the point that it's going to loop around. And then it does give you the keyword that this is a parabola, so you know you're going to have a U shape somehow. So the focus is at 3, -5. And then I need to count, this is the point it's going to loop around. So I know my curve is going to go somewhat like that, but I need to count specifically where the vertex is. So I'm thinking, what number is halfway between 3 and -5? And if you count, right, you can count however you need to on your graph paper, the answer is -1. So my focus is here at 3, -1, which should automatically eliminate A and C for us. Remember that it needs to be opposite inside of our parentheses. And then we just need to know, remember this part in our equation is 4P. So we say if we count, this is 4 away. So if you do that, that's 4 times 4, which is 16. And the reason it's going to be negative is because my parabola is looping around and opening down. And so negative is going to cause it to open down. Just so you know, if you see tomorrow, opening left will also make it negative. It just switches the x and the y in the equation. But know that left will be negative, even though it still works the same way as far as the counting. All right, a question like 15, the only thing I can tell you to do is to guess. There's not even a way for me to show you how to do that in your calculator. So if I were you, I would just guess on that one, and any that you guess on, just guess the same letter over and over again. If you want to guess C, that's fine. If you want to guess A every time, that's fine too. It'll work the same way. All right, now question 16 still has sine in it, which is something we haven't talked about, sine, cosine, and tangent in here. So you might think to guess on that one, except this one does say what is the maximum number of people. So what I want to show you is how you can still use your calculator to figure out a maximum. So for the most part, remember when we use our calculators, we're going to use y equals. So that's what I've done is I've typed in this equation into y equals. All right, and then I'm looking for the maximum, so I'm kind of looking where's the highest that it gets on any of these points. And I ended up tracing to find both of them, and both of them say something around 6.29999, blah, 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 which you and I both know if we were going to round that, that would be 6.3. All right, so that's going to be our answer is 6.3 is going to be the maximum there. So remember, you can use your calculator to do stuff even if you don't really know exactly what the equation means. And then 17 down here is a lot like the question we did before. We're going to graph the directrix, y equals 0, so cutting through 0 on the y-axis. And then the focus of my parabola is at -3, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This time, it's going to have to loop around that focus, so my parabola is going to have to open up somehow. And if I look for the vertex halfway in between, that's going to be right here. 3 is halfway between 6 and 0. So my vertex is going to be at -3, 3. And if we look at our equations, remember I need opposite inside the parentheses. So if you use that alone, the only one that's doing opposite is going to be C here. And then remember the 12 comes from 4p. So because this distance is 3 away, that's 3 times 4, which is 12. And it's positive because my parabola is going to open up. My best recommendation on one like this, there's a few different ways to answer it, but I think what you all are probably going to make the most sense of is to take this and to graph that in your calculator and maybe make a table of values and then compare that to this right here. So I'll show you two different options. The correct and true answer here is A. You can pause and take a second to read through those, but h of x is 12 units below f of x for the y-intercept. You could also have accomplished this by graphing and then, looking at the two graphs where they're going to hit the y-axis and just compared them that way. So that would have been another option. All right, question 19. Okay, so this question is asking about probability. So it's like the chances of getting something. And it says the chances of getting a specific number in on a 6-sided cube, which is like, think about a dice, is 1 out of 6, right? It's got 6 sides, so you only have one chance of getting like a 3 or whatever the number is they tell you. So they're saying which result is not consistent for this. So which one stands out as being the most unreasonable? So the correct answer is A, because if you rolled a die and you wanted to get a 3, if you got 4, like that number 4 times in a row, that should stand out to you as being a little odd. The other one's not getting the number that you wanted in 4 throws, that seems reasonable because there's 6 sides. So that kind of makes sense. 12 times out of 60 throws, if you divide 12 by 60 and simplify that in your calculator, that gives you 1/5, which is pretty darn close to 1/6. 12 out of 200, if we simplify that, we get 3 out of 50, which is pretty low. Like you could even turn that into a decimal and get 0.6. But that's still pretty close. It's not that unreasonable to only get the number you want that many times. It makes a lot less sense for you to get the same number over and over again. Think, right, if that happened in real life, you would think, oh, this might be a loaded dice and this is not fair. All right, question 20. So pause and take a second to read question 20. Okay, so you may need to take a moment to read or look up what these different things mean, but the correct answer here is an observational study because they're going to be observing what's happening. Experiment is going to like predict what's going to happen and then experiment with a control group and then another set of people that have been applied with certain factors. I'm not sure if that makes any sense. A sample survey is when you're asking people questions, and a census is when you're counting up how many people for some particular reason. So this one is observational because if you read it, they're going to be observing what's happening. Okay, so if you pause and take a second to read question 21, it's telling you who they're asking, and then asking you to think like, what would that be a sample population of? So first of all, this has to do clearly with people who like to shop at malls because they're at the mall talking to those people. So just because you live near the mall doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be there. So A and B don't make any sense. And because all of these, it's 5 different malls, but because they're all in a city, in like the same city, to me that means it's residents of the city who like to shop at malls. If it was of the state, then they may be 5 different malls across a state. But it specifies that this is in the city, so that's why I'm choosing the one that's in the city. Okay, question 22 says, a survey asked whether students would eat food served in the school cafeteria. What is the probability that a 10th grade student will not eat food served in the cafeteria? So 10th graders that said no, that's 47. And to do probability, we need to divide by the total. So we're going to do 47 divided by, and then we need to add up all of those numbers. And the total that I get, a number of students, the complete total there is going to be 410. So I'm going to divide 47 by 410. And it says round to the nearest hundredth, which is 2 decimal places. So I'm going to write from my calculator, they just gave me that was 0.11. The number is 0.1146, and that doesn't round. So there is going to be my final answer. That's the probability. Okay, here they're asking me to write equivalent expressions for x to the 6th for each of the attributes listed. These could be written differently. I'm just going to give you my answer. So something with a negative exponent, remember negative exponents create reciprocals. So I want it to equal x to the 6th. So if I make it 1 over x to the negative 6th, when that flips, it will come back and equal x to the positive 6th. Contains a squared factor, so that means I need something squared. Well, if I did x squared to the 3rd, that would be x to the 6th. Or you could do, instead of x squared to the 3rd, you could just do x squared times x squared times x squared. That's still an expression, and that's going to give you x to the 6th. All right, and then contains a fraction. To me, I don't see why the first one doesn't still fit that option. 1 over x to the negative 6, that is a fraction. So that still, to me, works for x to the 6th power. All right, so just pay attention to what they're asking you there is to write expressions using exponents that are equal to what they've given you. This question, 24, is even easier than maybe one that we did before because it kind of gives you a hint. It tells you what A, B, and C are, and it asks you to find the solution. So again, we're going to do the quadratic formula, which is going to be x equals negative b. Because b is already negative, I'm going to write positive 3 plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac. Remember, we want to put everything in parentheses, all over 2a. I'm going to type in just what's underneath the square root, not the square root symbol itself, to try to simplify this. And that's going to give me 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 3 all over 4. And the only thing you can do here to simplify is I can take this negative out. Remember, when the negative comes out, it becomes I. So your final answer is going to be 3 plus or minus I square root 3 all over 4. I'm not dividing by anything else because the only whole numbers I have are a 3. Technically, I guess there's a 1 right there and a 4, and there's nothing that I can divide both of those by, so I'm just going to leave that as my final answer. Actually, I wanted you to see, it says write a solution in each box, which means they actually want you to break this up and write it as 2 separate answers. So in one of the boxes, you would write 3 plus I square root 3 over 4. In the other box, you would write 3 minus I square root 3 over 4. Remember, that is 2 separate solutions, so make sure you separate them on your answer page. Okay, we talked about this question earlier. Remember that answers are opposite of what's inside the parentheses. So the x plus 3 is the easiest one to answer. The opposite there would be negative 3. On this other one, remember we said 2x minus 5. Originally, that would have been a bottoms up problem since there's a number in the front. So if we put the number back where it belongs down here on the bottom, this was, well, sorry, not 2 anymore, x minus 5 over 2, which is the same as x minus 2.5. I'm just getting that in my calculator by doing 5 divided by 2. So the answer then is positive 2.5. If you don't understand the parentheses, you can also type this original equation. You can type that into y equals and look for zeros on the y side of your table, and those will also tell you your solutions. All right, is it a factor? So we said to say, is it a factor? Or if they ask me to do division, that's either way, that's going to be this division. Remember, the number in the corner is opposite of what's inside the parentheses. The other numbers come from my coefficients, so 1, -1, -1, -2. And then I want to divide. To do that, I'm going to bring this down, and then I multiply, so -2, and then add straight down. Multiply, that is going to give me 6, add straight down, multiply, -10, add straight down. Remember, if the number in this last box over here is 0, then that is going to be a yes, that it is a factor. Since it's not 0, I know my answer is no. And clearly the remainder is -12. So remember, this last number is my remainder. If you, oh, I did not spell that right. If you have to write the equation, I also want you to remember that we count backwards. X to the 0, x to the 1, x squared. So the final equation, if for some reason you need that, is y equals 1x squared minus 3x plus 5. So just a reminder for that. All right, last question down here. They give me all this information, and you all remember the general formula is y equals a 1 plus, sometimes it's minus, so plus or minus r over n to the nt. But this one is not asking me to solve anything or even write an equation. It's saying what is the equivalent monthly depreciation, so it is going to be subtraction, percent. It just wants to know a percentage. So I'm just going to do the percentage that they give me for the year and divide that by 12 because there's 12 months in a year. And the answer we're going to get here is going to be 1, it says to the nearest tenth, so that's just 1.0%. All right, using that same equation from the previous question, I think I told you in class that I'm pretty sure all of these answers are wrong, so I'm just going to write the correct answer here. Remember, A is your starting point, so that's 32,300. It's going to be 1 plus or minus. Since this is depreciation, I'm going to say minus. Monthly, that's my N value. As Rayleigh calls it, those are my banking words, so into the 12th. So minus 0.083. Remember, we have to move the decimal 2 times. Divided by 12, and that is to the 12x power, or t. So remember that the 12 number, your N number, has to go in 2 places, at the bottom of the fraction and in the exponent. I think you all should be pretty good on those, but just so you know. Yeah. Okay, this question gives us more information that we need. Remember, on any pattern problem, like I said before, you need to have the start and the pattern. And they give me all of that in the beginning. They say twice as much, so that means the pattern is times 2, and her initial investment was $3, so that's my starting point. So I just put that in my equation, 3, and then the pattern is 2 to the n power, and I guess they're actually saying x is the variable to use, so an x should go there. All right, this question is super easy. We didn't even talk about this one, but the question is asking in the solution, what are the x values to the solution? So the solutions are these points where they're crossing, these 2 graphs are crossing each other, and they're asking for the x values. Well, if I look down at the x-axis, that is 0 and 2. So in the spaces provided, you would just say 0 and 2. If for some reason it had asked for the y values, the answers then would have been 1 and 5, because you would be looking at the y-axis. Okay, so today we said that because we went to the nearest half unit, we said the easiest thing to do, I think overall you all found the easiest thing to do was going to be to graph this and just to estimate. If it had not said that we were going to be rounding, you could use the table. But because we're going to be rounding, I think you all thought the graph was probably going to be easier. So I just used my cursor to get as close to the points that it names. First it says x-intercepts, so those are my 2 points on my x-axis. When I do that, I found that this first one was closest to 1. It really looks like 0.8, but that's going to round to 1. I can't really graph 0.8, so I'm just going to graph negative 1. And my other one is going to be really close to 2.5, so I'm just going to graph that in between 2 and 3 here. All right, then it says so I did my x-intercepts, then my y-intercepts where it's crossing the y-axis. So when I looked at that, it's at -7. That one I didn't even have to round at all. And then the last point they want me to use is find the maximum or minimum. So this one is a minimum because it's the bottom value. And the closest I could get was to find that the minimum was somewhere at 1 and -9. So I'm just going to come down here and plot the point 1, -9. And you can connect those, but if you notice it just says plot the points. You don't even have to draw the parabola. You can just plot those separate points. However, if it made you feel better to draw the parabola, then you could go ahead and connect the points and make them look like what you needed them to. All right, this question is talking about inverse. Remember, for inverse, we're going to switch the x and the y. I'm actually going to kind of give you a shortcut and just let you know. Inverses for questions, for linear questions, so that's questions that don't have any exponents on them. These for domain and range are always going to be all real numbers. Even if you use an inverse, it's still going to be a straight line. So both of these have inverses that are true for all the values of x. The inverse of something squared is going to be the square root. Remember, square root, you can't have negative numbers on the inside. So that one is not going to be true for all values of x because you can't use negative numbers. A cube root, if you try typing some cube roots in your calculator, you'll notice that you can take the cube roots of negative numbers. For instance, if you try to type in the cube root of -27, you get -3. That one works. So that does have all real numbers. And then fourth roots, basically anything that is an even root, you cannot have all real numbers. So that one is also going to not be true. The biggest thing, I wouldn't stress too much about this question, but the biggest thing that you just need to know is that inverse switches x and y. Remember, you can always check domain and range in your calculator, and you're looking, if you ever have to find it, remember you're going to be looking for where the error starts and then thinking about what values work for x and what values work for y. All right, for this question, they're asking me to do the same thing in graph like they did before, but it never says anything about rounding. So because of that, I'm just going to use the table because it's going to give me more exact points. So to find the x-intercepts, remember I look for 0 in the y, so that part's kind of backwards. So -2 on the x-axis, and it says 4 on the x-axis should be my 2 points. All right, so those are my x-intercepts. My y-intercept is going to be where 0 is on the x-axis. So that means my y-intercept is going to be at 16. And then it says the maximum, and if you notice, the maximum is right here. 18 is like the highest point. That's where it's going to turn around. It's also called the vertex. So you've got vertex, and your maximum here is going to be at 118. So if it doesn't say anything about rounding, I think you all are probably going to say that the table is going to be easier. So when you want exact values, you should probably use the table to find your points. And again, it just says plot the points. It doesn't say to make the graph. So you literally can leave those 4 separate points right there and you'll be just fine. Okay, so we did this question in class today. Remember, inverse means that you need to switch x and y. So I'll solve these for you. I'm probably just going to pause really, and so that you can see my work and see how I'm getting the 4 different answers. Okay, so take a second to just kind of look over my work, make sure you understand where I'm getting all of those from. I'm just switching x and y and then solving for y again to find my new equation. The other thing I want you to note is that inverses, just remember inverses are written with the little -1 sign. So know that if you see that, it's talking about an inverse, not just a regular function. All right, we've done a question like 34 a few times now. The first thing you're going to do is plot your directrix at y equals 12. And then we're going to plot our focus at 5, -6. Remember, we need to find the point that is halfway between, and it's going to loop around this focus point. So I know that means it's going to open somehow like this. Halfway between -6 and 12 is going to be at 3, because that is 9 away in each direction, so that's halfway between. So this point is now going to be 5, 3. Inside parentheses, we need opposite, so the x value is +5, so inside my parentheses, I need this to say -5. Oh, -5. And then in the other parenthesis, the y value is 3, but I need an opposite, so it's going to say -3. Because the parabola opens down, I know in my other list I can only choose from positive things, and this is 4p. So because p is 9, that's 4 times 9, so I'm going to choose -36 so that it will open down. All right, it's been a little while since we worked question 36. It's saying what makes t true? What makes the equation true? Remember, anytime you have an exponent as the variable, you need to think to do logs. So I'm going to first get the base by itself, divide by 4. So I'm going to have 10 to the 3t equals 3. And then I'm going to use my circle and change this over to log. So log base 10 of the number 3 equals 3t. Notice how that got my exponent gone. So now I can actually solve for t. So to do that, I'm going to divide by 3. Remember that your calculator already understands log base 10, so you don't have to change anything over. If you did have to change over, you would do log of 3 divided by log of 10, or whatever the base is, but you don't have to do that here because your calculator's smart enough with base 10. So you're just going to type in log 3 divided by the whole number 3. And when I did that, I got 0.159, and this says the nearest hundredth, so 2 decimal places, so that's going to be 0.16 will be my final answer there. Remember, you can always plug it back in just to check and make sure that it works. All right, if you read through this, I will tell you that the correct answer here is going to be A. This is a definition, so even though a 100-year flood is maybe not supposed to happen multiple years in a row in your mind, it just says a flood that has a 1% chance of being replicated in any single year. So just because it's happening 2 years in a row doesn't mean the definition should change. So that kind of tells you maybe why the other ones are going to be wrong. All right, to change something over into vertex form, we have to, we did one of these the other day, plus 8x plus 10. We need to complete this square. So we look at our first two numbers and take out our GCF. Our GCF here is 4. And we're just looking at a number. So this is 4 that we're pulling out. We're left with x squared plus 2x. Remember, in parentheses, we take half. So I'm looking for half of this number. So half of 2 is 1. So I'm going to have x plus 1 squared. And then think, really right here, I'm adding 1 squared. That's an additional thing that I'm putting in there, which is 1 squared is just 1. But then that's really being multiplied by 4. So really right here, I need to think to myself that secretly 4 is being added. Well, I can't just add 4, so I'm going to have to subtract 4, which means my new number, if I think about this right here, the plus 10 and the minus 4, that means my new number is going to be plus 6. So you may need to watch and hear that explanation again, but your final answer is going to be 4x plus 1 plus 6. All right, that's how we write that. And that's the end. If you need any help, you are obviously welcome to come see me in the morning. Still come to class first thing tomorrow, and we'll make sure you're ready and go down to the Lyceum together. You all are super duper awesome.